It was a quiet, almost eerie evening on the farm. The kind of night where the wind whispers through the trees, and the distant sound of crickets is the only thing breaking the silence. I had spent the entire day working in the fields, the exhaustion weighing heavily on me. My husband had gone to town for supplies, leaving me alone at the house for the night. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I preferred it. There was something peaceful about the stillness, the way the world seemed to slow down under the vast, star-filled sky. The house was old, creaky, with every step echoing through the wooden floors, but it was cozy. The soft glow of the lamp in the living room cast long shadows on the walls, and the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner and was about to settle in with a book when I heard it, the faint sound of a car engine in the distance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the noise grew louder, I stood up, curiosity creeping into my thoughts. It was late, too late for anyone to be coming by, especially out here on the edge of nowhere. I walked to the window and peered out into the darkened yard. The headlights of a car cut through the night, and my heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? I watched as the car slowed, pulling up in front of the house. The engine cut off, and the vehicle sat there for a moment, the silence settling again, more tense than before. The headlights flickered off, leaving the farm bathed in darkness. I felt a slight unease curl in my stomach. This was strange, I thought. No one came by this late unless it was urgent, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my jacket and made my way to the door, my footsteps soft on the wooden floors. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what to expect. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I squinted into the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking toward me slowly. My pulse quickened as I took in the sight of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. I could barely make out his features in the dim light, but there was something about him that felt different, unfamiliar. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and calm, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach churn slightly. "Sorry to disturb you this late, but I've had some trouble with my truck. It's just down the road." I nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of this unexpected visit. It was a common enough story, the broken-down vehicle, the request for help, but something about him made me uneasy. He was alone, and I didn't recognize him. I had a feeling I should have been more cautious, but I couldn't quite place why. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. "I don't want to trouble you too much, but I was wondering if I could come inside for a moment. Just until the tow truck gets here. It's a long wait out here, and I'd appreciate the warmth." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to let a stranger into my home, especially at this hour. But the loneliness of the night and the thought of him being stuck out there in the cold made me soften. Maybe it was just my need for human interaction after a long day of work. Maybe it was something else, something I couldn't name, but before I knew it, I found myself stepping aside, allowing him into the house. "Just for a bit," I said, my voice shaky as I closed the door behind him. The warmth from the fire in the living room greeted us, but it didn't erase the chill creeping up my spine. Something about him felt off. Yet I couldn't bring myself to ask him to leave. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything. He took off his coat and hung it by the door before turning to me with a small nod. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. "It's not often I meet someone so kind out here." I forced a smile, though the words sounded too smooth, too practiced. "Of course. It's no trouble." The silence between us grew, thick with unspoken words, and I found myself watching him more closely. There was something about the way he stood there, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And as the night dragged on, I began to wonder if letting him in was a mistake. But it was already too late. The door was closed. The lights were on. And whatever was about to happen would happen in the shadows of this old farmhouse, with no way of knowing what kind of surprise was about to leave me speechless. I just didn't know yet what it was. The air in the house felt thick with tension as I led him inside. I still couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine, but there was no turning back now. The man, whose name I hadn't yet asked, stood quietly by the door, his eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. The way he looked around, his gaze lingering on the old furniture, on the dark corners of the room, made me feel exposed, like I was on display. He noticed my hesitation, the way I stood stiffly in front of him, and gave me a slow, almost predatory smile. It was chilling. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said softly, his voice low and smooth, but there was an undercurrent of something darker beneath the words. "I'm just surprised to see someone out here this late," I managed, my voice shaking a little more than I intended. "But you're welcome to stay until help arrives." He nodded, taking a step closer, and for the first time, I noticed the heat in the room seemed to intensify. It wasn't just the warmth from the fire. There was something about the way he moved, the subtle dominance in his posture, that made my heart race. He sat down on the couch without asking, his body relaxed, almost too relaxed, as if he owned the space. I couldn't quite place it, but there was something unsettlingly familiar about his presence. As if he had been here before, or had some connection to this place that I didn't understand. "I appreciate this, truly," he said, his eyes fixed on mine now. "It's rare to find someone as welcoming out here. Most people would turn away a stranger." I forced a smile, though I could feel the tension building. "I'm just trying to be kind." But kindness was the last thing on my mind now. His words, his presence, they had changed something in the air, something that felt almost dangerous. I tried to ignore the creeping feeling of unease that was settling in my gut. "I can see that," he said, his gaze lingering a little too long. "You're more than kind. You're curious, aren't you?" My breath caught in my throat, and I looked away, not sure what he was getting at. But I could feel his eyes on me, making my skin prickle. I stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I should have asked him to leave. I should have told him to leave me alone and wait outside, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen, my hands trembling as I reached for a glass of water. I needed something to ground myself, to calm the swirling confusion in my head. I couldn't place it, but everything about this situation felt wrong. I turned around to find him standing in the doorway, his frame casting a long shadow in the dim light. "You're nervous," he said simply, almost amused. "But you don't have to be. You invited me in. Now, let's see how far you're willing to go." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had invited him in. I had opened the door, let him cross that line, and now there was no going back. He was right. I was nervous. But more than that, I was scared. Scared of what he might do, scared of how this was all unfolding. I set the glass down, my hands shaking now. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his breath warm on my skin, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of the tension between us. "I want you to see me for what I am," he said softly, his lips almost brushing my ear. "And I want you to understand that this isn't just about a broken-down truck." I froze. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and my heart pounded loudly in my chest. What was he saying? I wanted to pull away, to leave the room, but my body refused to move. There was a strange pull, an undeniable force drawing me toward him, making my mind clouded with thoughts I had never entertained before. I barely had time to react before he reached out, his hand gently brushing against my arm. His touch sent a shock of electricity through me, and I couldn't help the shudder that ran down my spine. The intensity in his eyes was unmistakable now. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was something more, and I was caught in the middle of it. "Please," he whispered, his voice low and almost teasing. "You don't have to pretend you don't want this." I should have told him to leave. I should have yelled at him to get out, but my mind was a mess of confusion and curiosity. I could feel the heat building in my chest, my body responding to him in ways I didn't understand, but couldn't deny. Before I could say anything, he closed the distance between us. His lips were on mine before I could stop it. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was urgent, almost desperate, as if he couldn't control himself anymore. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed for him to stop, but I didn't. The moment hung between us, impossible to pull apart, as everything I thought I knew about myself started to unravel. I didn't know how we got here, but I knew something in me had shifted. Something had broken. And now, as the door closed behind us, I realized I was no longer just a visitor in my own life. This night would be the start of something I couldn't undo.